A person can be convicted of a crime, such as murder for example, even if they did not commit the actual murder themselves. Under the joint enterprise law, if a person was present at the scene, whether they took part or not, if it is found that they encouraged, assisted in the crime in any way, there was a shared intent, or knew that the other person who actually committed the crime was going to commit the crime, then everybody is classed as equally guilty. Under the Accessories and Abettors Act of 1861, Section 8, legislation passed says that accessories can be given the same punishment as the principal offender, and proof of culpability can be obtained from evidence from social media content, or as lately, rap lyrics and music videos. But due to a highly disproportionate number of black men being jailed under the joint enterprise law, critics have accused the law as being based on racist stereotypes. For example, the gang narrative has been used against black men if more than a certain number of black males are seen together at any one time. And it's been argued that this gang narrative, as well as the conspiracy narrative when no crime at all needs to have taken place, just a thought or a plan to commit a crime, that has been used as evidence of gang association to sweep up everybody into the offence, which has been described as a discriminatory use of the law by using heavily racial gang narratives that mainly target young black men. In this video, we'll be looking at examples of when the joint enterprise law was used and the consequences thereafter. In 2017, in Manchester, Moorside, youth club worker Kemoy Walker decided to create an event for the local youth at the youth club he ran. Kemoy had an organisation called Manslaughter, which was a social enterprise set up in 2011 to create opportunities for young people to create and showcase their musical talents within the Manchester community. Manslaughter was publicly funded, with funding from the organisation also coming from the Greater Manchester Police to help engage youngsters in music. Kemoy had gathered a group of teens at the youth club to take part in an event to create their own music video using lyrics they had written themselves. The video was filmed one morning in a local park by a film student from Manchester Metropolitan University who had responded to an ad by Kemoy on social media looking for a videographer. The rap video was entitled Active Only, or AO for short, which was street slang for I'm up for going out or I'm about. The finished video was then uploaded to YouTube.
Yeah, it says when you know how to jump on this trap thing. Cause these man know that I'm out here, they know that I'm active. When I phone up DM like my nigga got the packing. When I break down says that I'm in the mother on a mad thing. Man I know for the scrapping, but it's got that deep, that man that I'm stabbing. Phone for the hunting, and if my nigga gets touched then you know that I'm banging. No joke, no lacking, no talk, straight action, straight face, no laughing.
But this video would be used in a murder case as proof that 11 teens, some featured in the video, were all a part of a violent gang, landing them in prison for a combined total of 168 years. A group of teens, black and mixed race, from Moorside, Manchester, were in the Broadfield Park area, known locally as the Wreck, in front of a publicly funded youth club called the Powerhouse, which was built in the year 2000. Not everyone who attended the youth club knew each other. 3 youths that were at the youth club that day had been in the Active Only video, but had not rapped in it. They'd only featured on the sidelines in the video. Some of the youths that were there, also at the youth club that day, had come to play football. At some point during the evening, an 18-year-old young man called Abdul Hafida was spotted nearby. He appeared to be drunk and was waving a knife around. A few weeks earlier, Abdul had attacked one of the teens at the youth club with a baseball bat, breaking his arm. And a few days before, he had threatened another boy that was at the youth club, holding a knife up to his throat. But the boy escaped unharmed. Upon seeing Abdul, some of the boys began to chase him. Seeing what was going on, some of the other boys from the youth club joined in with the chase, most likely for the excitement and to see what was going on, as is what usually happens in fights. But other than joining the chase and observe, they did nothing more. Their only role in what happened was as a bystander. Abdul was chased across Princess Parkway, a busy dual carriageway, where he ran through traffic, closely followed by the teens from the youth club. Abdul tried to get into 3 separate cars by pulling the handle of the cars to get in, shouting,
"Help! They're going to kill me!"
but failed, and the drivers drove off, probably not wanting to get involved. One of the teens from the youth club that day, 19-year-old Nathaniel Williams, had joined in the chase in a Vauxhall Corsa that he was driving, whilst another teen, 18-year-old Remikel Samuels, was driving an Astra in convoy with the Corsa. Eyewitnesses said that Abdul used the knife he was carrying to puncture the tyres of Remikel's car, causing Remikel to give up the pursuit. But the others carried on chasing him. In puncturing the tyre by stabbing them, Abdul broke the handle of the knife, leaving him to then carry just the blade of the knife, and in the process causing injury to his hand. As Abdul ran on, he shouted to passers-by,
"Help me! They're going to kill me!"
23 eyewitnesses witnessed the chase, and during the chase, 9 people out of the 23 called the police. 17-year-old Dalroy Wright was in possession of a hammer, which eyewitnesses saw being passed to 19-year-old Darrell Ford and being passed between the two. Dalroy Wright and Darrell Ford were captured on CCTV, always at the forefront of the chase. Nathaniel Williams, who was the one driving the Corsa, caught up with Abdul and, using the car as a weapon, knocked Abdul to the ground. But it was later revealed that the car had only clipped Abdul with the wing mirror, causing no damage or bruising to Abdul, but only managing to knock him off his feet. Once on the ground, Abdul was given a severe beating. But witnesses say that although there was a crowd of young boys, they only saw 2 members of that crowd beating Abdul. The rest were mainly bystanders, although they had joined in the chase. That was until a heavily pregnant woman who was on her way from work intervened, shouting at the teens to leave him alone. And so they all ran off, with one of them being heard by witnesses saying,
"Leave it. Let's go."
They all went, except for 2 of them. One of them was 19-year-old Devontae Cantrill. The other was a 14-year-old boy who can't be named for legal reasons due to his age, so has been referred to in court as S. Although badly bruised and beaten, Abdul was not fatally injured and was still alive. That was until Devontae Cantrill produced a knife after the others had all ran off and stabbed Abdul twice in the neck, severing his carotid artery, causing massive blood loss and brain damage, and eventually leading to cardiac arrest. An ambulance was called and paramedics battled to save Abdul's life in the street before transporting him to hospital, where he died 2 days later. A police investigation rounded up 11 boys that were at the youth club, and all 11 were charged with murder. During the court case oversaw by Judge Sir Peter Openshaw, 2 trials held in Manchester and in Preston, which have large black and Asian communities, led to complaints of racism by defendants and their family. It was an all-white jury. The lawyers were white and the judge was white. All the defendants were either black or mixed race. The family said that this didn't reflect the multicultural society. The prosecution argued that all 12 were in a gang or were loyal to the gang, despite most of them knowing each other in passing from their time at the youth club. But the prosecution said that they were all loyal to the gang, united to kill Abdul because he was from another gang and had strayed into their territory. The proof that the prosecution used as evidence that they were all in the same gang was the active-only video that the group had recorded weeks earlier, and that the title of the song, Active Only, was the name of the gang. This was the key evidence that the prosecution used, and it was this assumption which was used to try all 11 teenagers under the joint enterprise law. During the trial, it was revealed that Devante Cantrell, the one that had produced the knife and stabbed Abdul, the actual killer, was given life in prison, a minimum of 23 years. Nathaniel Williams, aged 17, from Rusholme, Manchester, the one who had driven the car that had knocked down Abdul, was also convicted of murder and given life in prison with a recommendation of serving a minimum of 19 years. Dalroy Wright, who had been seen with the hammer on CCTV and passing it between himself and Darrell Ford, was also found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation that he serve 19 years, whilst Darrell Ford, who the hammer was seen being passed to, his DNA was found on the shaft of the hammer, indicating that he had touched the hammer, so had likely delivered some blows with it. Darrell Ford also had cuts and abrasions to his right knuckles, indicating that he had punched Abdul in the mouth, as Abdul had bruising to the mouth and lips, consistent with being punched in it. Darrell had been the boy who had had his arm broken the year before with a bat by Abdul. Darrell Ford was also convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 20 years. Ramikel Samuels, who had been in the second car in pursuit of Abdul but had not been involved in the fight or even near the fight, as his car had been made stationary when the victim Abdul stabbed his tyres, was the only one of the defendants to plead guilty, and because of this he was sentenced to 8 years for manslaughter, serving 4 years incarcerated and the other 4 out on licence. Although he was nowhere near the scene at the time and did not take part in any of the attack, because he was a part of what the judge described as the chase, he was sentenced under the joint enterprise. Ramikel, who was a student at college, stated in his defence that he was not a part of the fight and did not continue to pursue Abdul after his tyres were punctured because his girlfriend had told him not to get involved in case it resulted in serious harm to the victim. And realising the truth in her statement, Ramikel did not continue. And when CCTV caught the rest of the group chasing Abdul across the dual carriageway, Ramikel is not seen on any CCTV as he had given up the pursuit by then. 17-year-old Reno Walters had been a passenger in one of the pursuing vehicles and had jumped out of the car as it was still moving to catch up with the pursuit as they chased Abdul across the dual carriageway. He was not far behind and soon caught up with the rest, at which point he participated in the beating of Abdul, although it is not known to what extent, but he had no weapon. Reno was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation that he serve 20 years. 18-year-old Trey Wilson of Wally Range was said to have taken what the prosecution describes as a lesser role in the attack. But the prosecution says that images of him on social media making gang signs shows that he was a part of the gang. He was also captured on CCTV after he chased Abdul across the dual carriageway with the rest, picking up a broken umbrella he found on the road, which prosecutors say was found near Abdul's body. But there's no physical evidence to say to what extent it was used, such as in being caught on camera using it on Abdul. Trey was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a recommendation that he serve 18 years. Darrell Goodall, aged 19, from Ashton-under-Lyme, with no previous convictions, was a part of the group that chased Abdul across the dual carriageway. He was not seen taking part in the attack, nor did he carry any weapon. In fact, he was seen standing on the other side of the road as an observer to the beating Abdul got, and not a participant. But the judge sentenced him to life in prison for murder, with a recommendation that he serve 16 years in prison. The judge gave the reason for his sentence as the fact that he was there when Abdul was being chased. Even though he played no part in any physical violence towards Abdul, he was just as guilty. It was also stated that Darrell Goodall had photos in his phone of him making gang signs with his hands, so therefore he was a keen member of the AO gang, so will be sentenced with murder also. The judge declared that there would be no shortening of any of the sentences and that they were to be served in full. And then even when their minimum terms had been served, they would not be released until the parole board agreed that they were no longer a threat to the public. The judge also stated that even when they are released, they will be on license for the rest of their lives. He then ordered a transcript of the judgment to be placed in their prison files so that when the time comes for parole, then the parole board will see his findings. William George, Devante Niche, and the 14-year-old boy who cannot be named for legal reasons, known as S in court, were all acquitted of murder, but found guilty of manslaughter. William George, who was 20 at the time of the murder and had no previous convictions, was a semi-professional footballer with a promising career ahead. William was on a bike and trailed behind and followed the crowd that was after Abdul, but because he was on a bike, he was able to surpass the crowd and caught up with Abdul first. Abdul attempted to thrust a knife at William in a stabbing motion, at which point William got off his bike and held it up as a shield to protect himself. When the rest of the teams caught up with them, William did not have any weapon, nor did he participate in any violence towards Abdul, instead following the crowd and observing the beating of Abdul from the sidelines, but without joining in. The judge said that William played a role in following the mob that was searching for Abdul, and that when Abdul thrust a knife at him, he had slowed Abdul down from escaping, because while Abdul was thrusting the knife at him, instead of escaping, it made the mob catch up to him. The judge also said that one photo of him that was found in his phone showed evidence of gang affiliation. William was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison, where he'd do 6 years incarcerated and 6 years out on licence. Devante Niche, 17 at the time, was the person that the murder victim Abdul had held the knife to the day before and threatened. Devante had been diagnosed with ADHD at a young age, but Devante was on a bike following the crowd, and he did not get off his bike either, nor did he join in the fight. In fact, he stood on the pavement as a bystander, watching everything happen from the sidelines, and did not get involved. Devante was also caught on footage amongst the crowd that had gathered when the paramedics had arrived, and continued watching on as the paramedics fought to save Abdul's life. But the judge put it to Devante that he was not there out of idle curiosity, but to report back and give updates to the perpetrators that had fled. Devante denied this. The judge also claimed that Devante had not been an innocent spectator just following the crowd to see what was going on, but was trailing behind the rest of the teens on his bike to make sure that Abdul didn't double back on himself and try to run back the way he had come, which Devante denied. But the judge still found him guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 8 years in prison, spending 4 incarcerated and 4 years out on licence. The 14-year-old, who was given the letter S in court to protect his identity, had no previous convictions. The judge said that the boy was impulsive, acutely suggestible, which made him vulnerable to exploitation. The judge said that the 14-year-old had been corrupted and manipulated by the others, especially Devontae Cantrell, who used him as a fetcher and carrier and a delivery boy on his behalf, who could be relied upon to do whatever was asked of him and keep silent. The judge said that although Boy S played no active role in the physical assault on Abdul, he made up the numbers by joining in the chase. The 14-year-old boy was sentenced to 5 years in a young offenders institution to serve half of his sentence. The gang narrative was the glue that held the prosecutions together and allowed them all to be charged with murder under the joint enterprise. Individual charges would have meant that as Devontae Cantrell was the one who had stabbed Abdul after the others had ran off, and they had no knowledge that he had a knife as it was concealed in a bag, then he would have been the only one charged with murder, and the rest of those involved in the fight would have been charged accordingly to what each did individually, such as affray, assault, violent disorder, and the ones who had not participated in any violence but had mainly been a bystander or spectator wouldn't have received any sentence, because it's not a crime to chase anybody or to watch as a bystander. The trials in Manchester and Preston led to complaints of racism by defendants and their families, who said the verdicts were a miscarriage of justice, as the defendants were involved in a fight that was non-fatal and had left the scene, and it was only one of them, Devontae Cantrell, who took things too far and stabbed the victim after they'd all ran off, and none of them knew it was going to happen or knew it had happened until after the fact. Also, Devontae Cantrell admitted to the stabbing. Amnesty International, the world-leading human rights organisation campaigning against injustice and equality everywhere, argued that young black men are being classed as gang members and being criminalised for that based on weak indicators, for reasons as trivial as the music they listen to and the videos they watch online. In 2016, a publication report by Patrick Williams and Becky Clark of Manchester University described a troubling expose of the use of joint enterprise against black and ethnic minorities based on rumour, racism, innuendo, which means to suggest, hint, or imply something that's not proven as fact. The publication describes the gang narrative as racist, saying that only 6% of serious violent offences in Manchester are caused by young black men, but yet 81% of people listed on police databases as gangs are all black. In 2021, 1,000 names of young black men were removed off Metropolitan Police Trident gang databases after a review showed they were not in a gang and had little to no risk of committing an offence. In court, the prosecution likened the young men to Americans' notorious Crips and Blood gang, and the evidence to argue that the teens were in a gang was thin. And the prosecution used pictures taken from their social medias of them wearing the colour red, which they used as evidence to say that the teens were emulating the American gang, the Bloods. But the families of the boys said that none of the teens habitually wore red. Only the stabber, Devontae Cantrell, had a conviction for violence, whilst 5 of them had no criminal convictions at all. The rest had minor petty criminal offences, which were not prisonable offences. Most of the teens were at college and had glowing character references. Some even had jobs, and one had even applied to university. None of them had any involvements for drug dealing, one of the #1 reasons for gang activity. MP Lucy Powell argued that similar incidents involving white teens were not prosecuted as gangs. Kemoy Walker, the award-winning youth leader who initiated the Active Only rap video and knew several of the teens very well, was shocked that the video was used as evidence to say that the teens were in a gang. Kemoy said that labelling them as a gang was wrong, and that it was rubbish to say that just because they all hung out at the youth club and sometimes the park, the gang label was wrong. Kimoy said they had come to the youth club as young children and did activities and were never classed as a risk, and that most of them were being helped to create CVs. The families of the jailed teens said that the judge was biased because of a traumatic event in his life. The judge's father and grandfather were also senior judges, but in 1981, the judge's father, William Openshaw, was stabbed to death by a John Smith who he had sentenced to Borstal. The judge declined to give comment. In May 2023, the families of 3 of the young men convicted, Darrell Goodall, who stood on the sidelines and took no part in the attack, Reno Walters, the passenger that jumped out the car to join the mob, and Nathaniel Williams, the one that drove the car at Abdul, clipping him with his wing mirror and knocking him off his feet, submitted a 189-page application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to try to clear their names in the murder of Abdul Hafida, and hoping to get their sentences overturned, saying they had been wrongly assumed by judge and jury as being part of a violent street gang, the narrative of which was the glue that held the prosecutions together when no such gang existed. And the rap video used as evidence of gang membership or allegiance was false evidence, and they were victims of institutional racism. Joint enterprise has been argued as a racist, lazy prosecution, with the parents of the teens saying, "Our boys didn't take anybody's life, it was the courts that took theirs." After campaigning by groups such as JENGBA, which stands for Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association, which was founded in 2010, the law on joint enterprise was altered in the Supreme Court, where the judges agreed that the interpretation criteria for the use of the joint enterprise law had been misinterpreted for 30 years, and that foresight alone is not sufficient to establish guilt, and that a person should only be prosecuted if they intend to assist or encourage a person committing the crime.